is Faith Works Live. I'm so glad it does. This is Rebekah Haynie, and you are listening. I'm so glad you are. This is a big week. The Iowa Caucuses, so from where we sit in our home in Iowa, the Iowa Caucuses, that cycle is officially underway. That really means the U.S. presidential race for 2024 is officially underway, and we were at the biggest place, this kickoff event, Front Row, the Family Leadership Summit, led by our friends at the Family Leader here in Iowa, and they are internationally relevant. They've really been setting a great tone for what it looks like for Christians to engage well biblically in the realm of politics and civil leadership. The candidate forum, I think, got the most attention, but this is a whole big event that is seeking to engage in many fronts, whether that's preachers, church leaders, your average everyday Joe and Jane citizen. How do we think biblically, and how do we vote biblically? How do we engage biblically in the civic realm? And how do we counsel our leaders, our employees in our state, in our city, and in our nation? And how can we bring our nation back to a state of revival? I mean, all of those are major questions. I think that's the heart's cry for most of us listening from out here in the cheap seats. We talk about wanting our country back, but I think our country needs to turn back to God. As Ronald Reagan once said, if we ever forget that we're a nation under God, we will be a nation gone under. And I don't think that's any clearer than it is right now from where I sit when I look out the window. But my prayers for my country are that God's people will stand up and be heard, that God's people will speak the truth in love and will refuse to be silent about the things that God says matter. I saw that this past weekend. So we'll get into the nitty-gritty of the politics from the Iowa caucus cycle, but also some of the main messages that I heard loud and clear today from the Family Leadership Summit. And my escort was none other than the handsomest guy that I know, Matthew Haynie. Yeah, I should say he's my husband and better half. I don't compliment all my guests that way. How are you, Matthew?
I am doing good. I will give you your $20 later.
Oh, goodness. I would settle for a fancy dinner and having the dishes done, but that's between you and me to figure out later. Overall, what did you think of this? I thought it was a little different this year.
Well, first of all, I mean, it was sold out.
Yes.
So any of the news media out there that would like to try to say that this wasn't a sold-out event, rest assured, this was beyond sold out. This was standing room only. So
I think there were between 2,000 and 3,000 people there.
It was a well-attended event, for sure.
I was one on the front row, and I was also running around trying to catch candidates wherever I could, and it was a very busy day for me. I got in my steps. The overall tone, I thought, was pretty positive for the most part, that people are willing to engage. They want to engage. I guess the elephant in the room was the candidate that wasn't there.
Correct.
Donald Trump, who is, of course, polling number one, no matter where you look.
And this was something that was
decided he was not going to be there, and he was insulting about it.
This was something that was, well, I don't know if he was insulting, but I didn't hear his remarks about it. But I did notice something that was quite interesting, and that was you didn't see a lot of Trump hats here. You know, I did see some people that were decked out with the hat, the tie, the whole 9 yards, the Trump. You did see a couple of those, but I believe this time at the last election, you saw an overwhelming amount of that. I mean, at the caucuses just last year, there were hundreds of Trump T-shirts and hats and things. I might have seen 5 or 6.
Yeah, maybe people were disappointed, perhaps, that he wasn't there. But I think that really lent more open stage time, maybe a little more fresh air, a little more breathing room for the other candidates. And you got to take a nice, close look at what they stand for. And that may be for better or worse, depending on who you were that day.
I think Trump's comment on this 6-week abortion ban being too much really made a lot of evangelicals have to make a decision. A lot of pro-Trump evangelicals had to make a decision between their beliefs and their moral beliefs and supporting a president that obviously is not in line with that moral belief. And I believe every Christian should only vote for candidates who are going to be pro-life. And
right.
Being pro-life means that life begins at conception. Life begins when you hear that heartbeat.
Right.
I would go further to say life does begin at conception, but I'm okay with the when, life at the heartbeat. But Trump is saying that the 6-week or 7-week ban was too much. That conflicts with the fundamental morality that is life is precious and it must be protected.
Right. And this was from a couple months ago that
Yes.
several months ago that he said this. I think it was in conjunction with the bill that Ron DeSantis signed in Florida, which is very similar to the one that my favorite part of the day was watching Kim Reynolds sign the heartbeat bill, which is a pro-life protection. It's a restriction on abortion here in the state of Iowa. And now that's going to immediately go to the Supreme Court. But it was a fun moment. All the legislators and the governor are doing their part, I will say. And so it was a great moment to be able to recognize that, no, we're going to stand courageously for life in Iowa. And she deserves major props. It was wonderful to see a full stage of legislators standing there smiling ear to ear, applauding for life in the state of Iowa and protecting life. And that's a much earlier protection. Again, life begins at conception, and I'm never going to stop fighting for that, ever. I don't believe that this is at all where we would stop. But as you said, I mean, Donald Trump has made some statements contrary to that, saying that's too much or too extreme. I'm hearing other candidates that talk more about like the 15-week legislation on the federal level, or they start equivocating, saying, oh, well, this is a great, which is what I heard, I think, from Tim Scott and Vivek Ramaswamy, saying that this is a great victory because it's handled at the state level. And the states can decide what they want to do. And then when you ask them about a federal regulation, they end up talking more about, say, like 15 weeks, because that's where the Dobbs decision from the U.S. Supreme Court came down. That's kind of the mixed messaging that I'm hearing. And I think we could actually do a lot better. If we're going to stand for strong conservative choices, we should say life begins at conception. And our laws should reflect that your rights begin when you do, period.
That's one of the things that I wish Tucker had been a little bit more, I guess, with that attack dog mentality with regards to a couple of our candidates. At the very beginning of this summit, I mean, Tucker had no fear. He was going after these candidates. And I don't know if he was told to dial it down. If so, that was wrong. Nobody should have told him to dial it down. But he came back in after lunch was over, and his questions to Nikki Haley were softballs compared to everything else.
It was a little different.
He was.
Wasn't it?
And one of the issues that should have been asked, because this is a family leader event, and we already know for a fact that Nikki Haley has made it very clear her stance on abortion. So that is something that should have been pushed. We cannot allow Nikki Haley to get away with this. Well, I'm just thankful that my husband was given the chance to be born. Sure. Saying that I'm pro-life and that I'm happy that somebody was given the chance to be born does not make me pro-life. Being pro-life is actively getting involved in the discussion, actively getting involved in the solution. And as a leader, she needs to be actively involved in the solution. And she's not. She's gone on record several times for saying that a federal abortion ban is unrealistic. It's not unrealistic. In fact, the Constitution protects life. The Constitution doesn't define life as being unborn or born. It just says it protects life, period. Mm-hmm. And so the Constitution protects life, which means a federal ban is realistic and should happen. And that just amazes me. I mean, you say you're pro-life, but yet you're not going to defend life. That is something I don't understand. You know, I think Tucker should have gone after her for that, because this is a family leader event, and the evangelicals that were there needed to know this.
Well, and as someone who got to ask Nikki Haley face-to-face about life at the CNN town hall, it's kind of that's my jam. And I do not disagree. I think that she does do that sort of state-by-state dance, which is what you're seeing from a lot of Republicans who are concerned about electability. And that's a word that you hear a lot, especially come caucus time, but from the types of folks that tend to tell you, oh, well, it's good. It's all well and good to be conservative. It's good to say you're pro-life, but don't ask somebody what it looks like. For example, it's good to say you're pro-Second Amendment, but what about red flag laws? What does that actually look like? You have to quantify. When you say, you can make all the slogans that you want, but you have to be able to quantify what that looks like and back it up. And I think that candidates like Nikki Haley need to be confronted on what that plan looks like. If you're asking, this is totally fair and right. Someone's asking you for your support to be the most powerful leader in the entire world. It's totally fair for you to ask them, what does your leadership look like? And I'm going to need more than slogans. I'm going to need a point-by-point description and evidence as well. And that's a huge point, which I'll return to here in just a second. Let's put a star by that one, because we want to look at people's experience and record. And I wonder what you think about how the average caucus voter is looking at experience. Another person that I think did really well, especially for being a fairly new face in Iowa, was Tim Scott. So he was in the morning session, and I heard a lot of people reflect positively on Tim Scott. So Tucker Carlson was moderating all of this, and by moderating, I mean going after them like a dog with the bones, at least in the morning. And so Tim Scott was first up on the hot seat, and I thought he did overall pretty well. Right. Here's probably his best answer, or where he connected the best with the audience during Tucker's questions.
I believe America can do for anyone what she has done for me. We are living in a time, thank you, ma'am. We are living in a time when there is this pervasive force, radical left, parts of corporate America, that continues to force this culture of grievance on the American people. And along with the culture of grievance comes this drug of victimhood, the narcotic of despair, that you can make a profit off of conflict. I want to stand in the gap and say the truth of my life disproves the lies of the radical forces that believe that we should be in constant conflict with each other. America needs positive, powerful, biblically sound leadership to regain the high ground. It's one of the reasons why when I became a Christian September 22nd of 1983, I started reading the gospel and understood that I'm a part of a bigger family, that a guy who grew up in a single parent household, mired in poverty, who wanted to know, who am I according to my Father? I found in Galatians 3:28 that I'm actually adopted, a joint heir in the family of God. And as part of that family, all things are possible. And there are forces in this nation that hates objective truth. Here's an objective truth. 2 genders, 1 truth. You see, here's where we have to get to. We have to get to a place where we are willing to understand and appreciate the strong foundation on which we stand. And whomever doesn't like that, count me as a force for the good of this nation. Count me as a guy who believes that God is able to do exceedingly abundantly above all that you ask or imagine. And if you write a check and you don't like that, you can have your money back. Because I don't stand for donors. I don't stand for folks who contribute. I stand because there is a man who walked on this earth for 33 years, who paid the ultimate price for our freedom. And if I'm going to do my job is, according to Matthew 25:21, well done, my good and faithful servant. That's the job I have. That's the place I look for my support. If you play for an audience of 1, it doesn't matter who makes the contributions. And frankly, I don't know those donors that you're talking about who are flocking to my campaign. I'm looking forward to them coming. We should not be concerned about the donors. We should be thinking about a responsibility. My responsibility is to the bosses that I serve. As President of the United States, I will work for the people. Let me tell you what I'm running on, and this is really simple. If you take out a loan, you pay it back. Number 1. Number 2, my mother worked 16 hours a day as a nurse's aide. She'd come home after changing bedpans and rolling patients, and she taught me one very valuable lesson. There is dignity in all work. Therefore, if you're able-bodied, you work. That's called America. Number 3, if you commit a violent crime, you go to jail. Period. Number 4, men should compete in sports against men. And number 5, closing our southern border because of the national security risk that it poses is absolutely in America's best interest, period. And for those who don't like common sense conservative principles driven by the Judeo-Christian Foundation, choose another candidate. It's that simple.
That's where I think Tim Scott does the strongest. He shines the brightest is on his personal story. It's a very optimistic one. It looks at America as still the land of opportunity, the land of hope, and it flies directly in the face of the people who try to divide us by saying America is a terrible place, it's systemically racist, no non-white American can ever get ahead. He contradicts that just by his biography. And I think the more that he talks about that, the more hopeful vision he casts. I think people are really intrigued by that and interested in that.
Yes and no. I mean, I agree wholeheartedly that his story is awesome. The problem is he talks about that story all the time.
I've heard it a few times, yes.
Yes. And so at some point in time, we need to stop talking about yourself and let's start talking about the issues. So your first day in office, what are you going to do? Mm-hmm. All right. Yeah, I love that your mama loved you. All right. My mama loved me too. Great. Okay.
Everyone loves a mama.
Yes, exactly. Yes. And I believe the American dream is alive. So you're talking to people that already think that the American dream is alive. All right. So we're not going to argue with you. We like that. But I want to know what you're going to do on day one to keep America safe. I want to know on day one what you're going to do to keep fentanyl on the other side of the border. I want to know on day one what you're going to do to fix this human trafficking problem. I want to know on day one what you're going to do to preserve religious freedom. I want to know on day one what you're going to do to stop this censoring and this militarization that the agencies at the federal level are doing to us at the at the state level and even in our homes. I mean, we can't go on Facebook and say that Fauci is a joke without being put in Facebook jail. I mean, this kind of censoring has to stop. What are you going to do about it? And at some point in time, he needs to stop talking about himself and start talking about the issues, which is why I think at this event, he probably, is going to go home with third ranking. If we're going to rank this as and who won, he's coming in third in my vote. Because I love Tim Scott. Yeah. But I'm hearing the same things, and I want to hear what he wants to do about it.
Now it's time to get into the meat. So this is kind of like, I would say for Tim Scott, he's been testing the waters. He's been going around. He's been doing a lot of events with preachers, with church leaders, right? This is his base. He's really courting the evangelical vote. I think he's very at home there. He drops a lot of Bible references. He has that kind of cadence when he gets up. He was the candidate that was moving around stage. He was trying to work the crowd like a preacher would. I mean, all that's well and good if it's genuine.
Correct.
And that's what I want to see is he putting on a show or is this really who he is? And so this is his debutante ball, as it were. And
he might be the best candidate of all of them out there. But it comes down to that question. Is he genuine? And when you talk about yourself so often, so many times, sometimes you come off as being disingenuous. And then the other issue is, what is he going to do on day one?
Right. What's your plan? And that's usually where people go in and do like your detailed breakdown on the website. And you can do videos that describe, here's my border plan in 2 minutes or less. That kind of thing where the specifics and actually I think another candidate that we'll get to, Vivek Ramaswamy, does a lot of those specifics really well.
Yes, he does.
He's done a ton of research, even though he's not an elected official. And so I think Vivek really impressed people about the specificity of his vision.
But he impressed me at the Faith and Freedom Coalition. I thought he won that Faith and Freedom Coalition, not quite hands down, but close to hands down. He's a couple
months back.
Yes. I mean, he's impressed me. He's number 2 on my list. He would get the silver.
Ooh, okay. Yes. So now we're dropping teasers. That's what I wanted to hear. I wanted to hear who everyone wants to know rankings and who wins, winners and losers. That's what we're doing. All of these things subject to change and time stamped for a reason. I had a great time at this event. I thought they did a really good job. I think Tim Scott went over really well. So he was number 1. And then number 2 was Asa Hutchinson. This is in order, not in order of prominence. So he was up next on Tucker's hot seat. And oh boy, I don't know if he could see straight by the time he was done with that shellacking. That was uncomfortable.
And I don't have really a lot to say about this. No. I will admit, towards the beginning of this, I got up and left and decided that I would check on our table, the Vanguard table, and I don't have any time to listen to somebody who's a Democrat wearing Republican colors. So,
ooh. So why do you? Let's tell people real quick why we say that. The only reason I knew the name Asa Hutchinson was not because he had launched a quixotic campaign for president with no realistic path to the White House. Not that I mean, I've supported candidates that really didn't have a shot either, just because I believed in them in the past. So that's not, that's kind of my jam. But I knew his name because the fine people of Arkansas had passed through the legislature a protection bill for minors who are gender confused, who said, no, in the state of Arkansas, we're not going to mutilate our children. Thank you very much. We're going to protect them from gender confusion, from gender distortion, and we're not going to allow you to mutilate or castrate our children here. And he, as a Republican governor, vetoed that.
Yeah.
And Tucker asked
huge.
him about that on stage, and well, he should, and I think everybody took note.
Correct.
So
and booed.
Herein
They
and
booed
good.
his response, yes.
And herein endeth the Hutchinson campaign. Another campaign that went surprisingly sideways, we shall say, was up next, and that was Vice President Mike Pence. This one I'm not sure I saw coming. I'll be quite honest. In fact, why don't we take a bit of a break? For those who haven't seen this, just strap in, because it's going to be a bumpy ride. We'll cover all the rest of the upcoming candidates. Up next in the hot seat is Vice President Mike Pence, and we'll let you hear a little bit of how Tucker Carlson volleyed back, and then kind of the future for the rest of the candidates, as well as our rankings for breaking down all the big names at the Family Leadership Summit. You're listening to Rebekah Haynie, to the illustrious Matthew Haynie, and our opinions. Let us know your opinions too, especially if you were there. We'd love to hear what you think, whether or not you agree or disagree. Let us know your feedback too in the notes or the comments for this section, or just connect with me, Rebekah Haynie. This is FaithWorks Live. We'll be right back. There's no better time than now to stand for life. And you can stand with Iowa's original pro-life organization, Pulse for Life. They're the longest standing nonprofit pro-life organization in Iowa, and they are dedicated to informing, educating, and inspiring a new generation to value the sanctity of all human life, from fertilization until natural death. They serve at the State House. They educate in classrooms, at events. They proudly serve on the coalition of pro-life leaders. They are on the front lines of the battle against this throwaway culture of death that we see all around us, and we are winning ground. Hearts and minds are changing, and the pro-life movement is continuing to grow. And you can be a part of the exciting things that are happening right here in our own backyard at pulseforlife.org, and get your finger on the pro-life pulse. Sign up for their newsletter, find ways that you can make a difference, and how you can change hearts and minds with their pro-life apologetics course, pulseforlife.org. Welcome back to FaithWorks Live. Oh man, the Family Leader Summit was one busy day, and it's really the official kickoff for not only the Iowa Caucuses, but the presidential cycle for 2024. And we take our First in the Nation status very seriously. We like to vote our values, and we are not shy about asking candidates tough questions about where they stand on the most important issues of the day. We talked a little bit about life. We kind of lead with that, life in the family. It's the Family Leadership Summit after all. But we also covered immigration. We covered foreign policy and the war in Ukraine. In fact, that's where Vice President Mike Pence ended up in quite the hot seat from Tucker Carlson's questioning. My better half, Matthew Haynie, is with us to break down his analysis. And Matt, you and I were sitting, about 5 rows back, yes, and watching a vice president squirm. And I've never been so uncomfortable. And at the same time, you couldn't look away. It was a popcorn moment for sure. Like, you just sat there saying, oh, what's he going to do next? How long is this going to... The suspense is terrible. I hope it lasts.
Well, I've been kind of pro-Pence for a bit. I mean, I don't think he was ever my top candidate, but I was starting to garner a little bit of, maybe we should pay attention to this guy. Just because of the fact that this is not a man who wants to engage in this back and forth attack type politics.
Mm-hmm. I love his idea about bringing civility and respectability back into politics. Honestly, I think that's a wonderful rallying cry. The honest, well-meaning, kind people should be able to have influence in these elections. It shouldn't be about calling names.
But if we think about it, this was the exact way. I mean, this is just Bush politics 101. He is doing everything that the Bushes did when they ran.
And that's not a compliment to you?
Oh, no, that's
okay.
scary because, anybody that remembers Bush politics knows that they would promise you the moon, and they never delivered. And they didn't care what they said on the record. Once they were elected, they did enough to where they could get reelected again. But
they were kind of the beginning of the big spending Republicans in the modern era.
And you could make a list of all of the promises they made and compare it to all the promises they failed to keep, and it's astounding. Mm-hmm. And Pence comes from that era, or that's the way he's playing politics, which bothers me. He didn't want to answer questions. He would deflect to give himself enough time to think about the answer. And like the first one was when Tucker asked him about January 6th debacle and said, do you consider this an insurrection? Immediately, instead of answering the question, which in my mind, this is a yes or no question. And a lot of these politicians were doing that. I mean, I would love to have a politician. You want to win my vote? Just answer yes or no to some of these questions that are being asked. Okay? But
at least one of them did that. And yes. we'll get to them.
But Pence, when asked about the insurrection on January 6th, first of all, decided to spend 5 minutes thanking the family leader. Which is such a politician thing to do. You could have done that when you first got out on the stage, but no, he decided to use that as a moment to collect his thoughts. I wouldn't have to collect my thoughts. It was not an insurrection. You know what an insurrection is? An insurrection is what happened in Minnesota during the George Floyd riots. That's an insurrection.
I remember that.
I was there.
Yep.
But
it was ugly.
And so he finally answered, and he said he wouldn't call it an insurrection. And I did like his comments on that, talking about the fact that, but it was kind of like a side remark when he said that he thinks that equal vigor needs to be brought to the BML activists in Minnesota when it comes to prosecution.
Yeah.
There was no, here's what I'm going to do to make sure that happens when I'm elected.
Mm-hmm.
Some of the other candidates said, here's what I'm going to do about this when they're elected. Pence didn't, and I wish he could have definitely come out and said, here's what I will do to make sure that we prosecute these activists that are destroying public property and attacking people.
Yeah.
And then Tucker asked him another simple question. Why do you think the people on January 6th were mad? And Pence never answered that. Not once.
And Tucker came back and reset that question several times.
Yeah. And Pence refused to answer. Mm-hmm. I mean, he was getting booed.
He did get booed a few times.
Because instead of answering it, he blamed law enforcement and then went on. But he didn't say why law enforcement failed. He just blamed law enforcement and said that as president, he would make sure that, law enforcement would get things right. Mm-hmm. The reason why he's blaming law enforcement, it's because he was scared, and no man likes to be scared. And so he's very passionate about January 6th being a bad thing. Mm-hmm. And there are some people that did some bad things, but nothing like what happened in Minnesota.
And the reason I think those comparisons are so important and so key, it isn't because you're targeting like one group of Americans over another group of Americans and saying some riots are okay and others aren't. It's that the riots that were fostered by the people in power for months and months, and in the case of some cities like Portland and Seattle, for over a year, the people that were supposed to be in power were venerating the protesters, the rioters, the mobsters that were burning cities, that were beating people up in the square, that were targeting police, that turned our cities into war zones, that gave excuses for theft, for property damaging, just all-out assault in neighborhoods that made it impossible to even live or work in these places. And the same government that decried one day, January 6th, and one riot and one particular value system that was represented there, one particular demographic, not only refused to castigate the BLM riots, but venerated the violence. Mm-hmm. The candidates need to be able to recognize that and to call it out for what it is. We've got violence in the streets. We need to stop this. What's going on? Where have we gone wrong? Let's restore the rule of law again. And that would mean rule of law that is equal for everybody. But I think what was important about Tucker's question, specifically getting back to Mike Pence away from that rabbit trail, is that he wants to reassure the conservative voters that they're being heard, that their concerns about losing their country, their concerns about that they can't trust the basic systems in our government anymore, that they're being heard, that they're being understood, and they are seeking someone channel that voice. And I think that's why you see over and over again the huge poll numbers for Donald Trump, because he was their protest cry. He was the stick it to the man vote. He was the one that says, I see you, I hear you, they hate me because I represent you. I'm standing in their way. They want to get to you, but they're coming after me because I'm standing in their way. Like, I'm here to protect you. And so I think any candidate that is any, I guess, non-Trump candidate, since we're over here on this side of the stage, that represents that is able to pick up that flag and say, maybe in a more disciplined way, maybe in a more specific way, consistent and trustworthy way.
So I think the big reason, you kind of hit a little bit on why I believe that he was getting booed so much. And because Pence, yes, because after attacking the LEOs, he attacked Trump and said Trump's words were to blame, for some of this. And it's just, nowhere in Trump's speech did he tell anybody to swarm the Capitol, to break doors, to break windows, to hit people, to break into offices. Nowhere did he tell them to do anything. His words were not remotely close to militarizing the people. I mean, you want to take a look at militarizing words. I mean, just take a look at those BML activists, and they're not being prosecuted. And so he's trying to blame Trump. He is spouting essentially the entire liberal rhetoric when it comes to January 6th. He is firmly sided himself with the liberals with regards to January 6th. And that's why he was getting booed there, is the people want to know that their vote matters. And that's exactly what Tucker Carlson was trying to get him to answer. He wanted Pence to say, hey, why is America angry? America's angry because they don't think their vote counts.
Mm-hmm. They can't trust that there's a system that will be honest.
And we know that's what Tucker was going after, because his follow-up question was talking about voting.
Mm-hmm. Voter integrity. How can we restore voter integrity?
Yeah.
I think that what people will remember the most is that interaction about Ukraine. Because there were several related questions that were all about Ukraine. And honestly, if you look at the polls, I don't think most conservative voters have Ukraine on their top 5 or their top 10 list of reasons they're going to vote. It might help sway their opinion back and forth, but I think there's maybe very few people that have Ukraine as a litmus test. But this exchange was revealing.
Correct. That kind of came after the voting exchange, but that issue and the voting machine thing, these are key issues that...
where he wouldn't say to stop electronic voting?
Correct.
That part?
Yeah, those two issues, the voting machine and the Ukraine thing, that seemed to be a common theme throughout the entire event with all the candidates. And that seemed to be, in my opinion, based on the applause, that seemed to be something that at least Iowans here care about a lot, is get rid of these stinking voting machines. And Pence refused to try to say, yeah, let's do that. He said he would be open, but he tried to say it was a states thing. And Tucker said, no, it's a constitutional issue. So Tucker actually attacked him right back, said, no, it's not a state thing. It's a constitutional issue. And Pence, again, refused to budge from this being a state issue. And then after that big old fiasco, they went into the whole Ukraine thing. Yeah. And, he was getting booed both here and he got booed again when it came to foreign policy, because Pence was trying to say, Ukraine is great. Ukraine is good. We need to give them funds. We need to do this. We need to do that. Still refused to say whether or not we should put boots on the ground, but you could tell he thought we should. I mean, because he refused to answer.
That was the impression that you got.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. Well, and here's just a short moment. Again, it was, as the kids like to say, it was kind of cringe. It was very awkward. If I had laid odds on which candidate would be booed repeatedly at a Christian conservative voters panel, I would not have laid money on Mike Pence. But I remain surprised to this day. So here's a short clip of what this sounded like. I think this is what people will remember.
I mean, we provided arms to Ukraine so they would be better equipped for this moment.
But let me ask you a question. I'm sorry.
Joe Biden cut off military spending when he came in, and even after that heartless, unprovoked invasion, I mean, he signaled incredible weakness, especially after that disastrous withdrawal from Afghanistan. And all along the way, the Biden administration has been slow in providing military support. Make no mistake about this. We promised them 33 Abrams tanks in January. I heard again 2 weeks ago in Ukraine, they still don't have them. We've been telling them we'll train their F-16 pilots, but now they're saying maybe January we'll let somebody transfer some jets.
I'm sorry, Mr. Vice President, I know you're running for president. You are distressed that the Ukrainians don't have enough American tanks. Every city in the United States has become much worse over the past 3 years.
Yeah.
Drive around. There's not one city that's gotten better in the United States. And it's visible. Our economy has degraded. The suicide rate has jumped. Public filth and disorder and crime have exponentially increased. And yet, your concern is that the Ukrainians, a country most people can't find on a map, who've received tens of billions of U.S. tax dollars, don't have enough tanks. I think it's a fair question to ask, where's the concern for the United States in that?
Well, it's not my concern. Tucker, I've heard that routine from you before, but that's not my concern. I'm running for president of the United States because I think this country's in a lot of trouble. I think Joe Biden has weakened America at home and abroad. And as President of the United States, we're going to restore law and order in our cities. We're going to secure our border. We're going to get this economy moving again. And we're going to make sure that we have men and women on our courts at every level that will stand for the right to life and defend all the God-given liberties enshrined in our Constitution. Anybody that says that we can't be the leader of the free world and solve our problems at home has a pretty small view of the greatest nation on earth. We can do both.
That, I think, was one of the big three takeaways for everyone who attended that event. That was a really, like I said, that's not what I expected to hear, but the day was full of surprises. I think that was something that will live to haunt the Mike Pence presidential campaign. In fair credit to Mike Pence, he did come in. We were also part of a luncheon just after this. We broke for lunch, and he came and addressed our crowd as well, to remind people that he, stands for life and why he believes in the freedom and the hope of America. I don't think any of that should be forgotten. I think if you look at somebody's entire record, you have to be fair about it. Mike Pence has stood for many of the things that we as conservatives hold dear. Like I said, I do think we need more civility and respectability in politics. I think we should treat other people like Christians, even if we're in the middle of the swamp. Shine a light, like I always say. But I think this is a different time. And I think the fact that he got booed, not once, but repeatedly on that stage of his likely voting base shows that people are looking for something different this time. Would you agree? I don't know. What do you think about that?
I agree.
All right. Moving on. Let's see. We took a break for lunch, and then we had just lots of fun talking with all the different folks there. And morning was a little different than afternoon. It was sort of a tale of two Tuckers, a tale of two moderators. Yes, it was. I will say before we get off the schedule that Alistair Begg was their special faith-based, they always have a high-profile faith leader come in. Yes. And he brought the fire. And I didn't even get to see all of it, and I was disappointed I didn't get to see all of it. But he spoke about courage. He spoke about backbone. He spoke about the courage of our convictions.
Brave enough to take on the onslaught against the life of the unborn. Brave enough to challenge the notion that women are only free if they are free to rid themselves of an unwanted child. It is not true. Brave enough to take a stand for those who are on the margins of society and who are most vulnerable and most in need. Brave enough to establish the immutability of biological sex. Brave enough to say, if you were born as a man, you will die as a man, no matter what you do to yourself. Brave enough to uphold that. On the basis of what? Our prejudice? No, on the basis of where we started. He made us in the image of God, male and female. Brave enough to say that the only place for sex is within the framework of a heterosexual, monogamous, lifelong relationship, which is called marriage, and which is the only real marriage. Last word, humility. Humility. Let not the wise man boast in his wisdom, the mighty man in his strength, but let him boast in this, that he knows me, the living God. We who are in Christ live in this world as members of another world. It's time for us to oppose the lies, while at the same time feeling compassion for those who've been deceived. It's time for us to pray for a massive spiritual awakening. We don't need a church that will move with the world. We need one that will move the world. And if the signs of the prophets are written on the subway walls and the tenement halls, they're also carved into some of the most historic buildings in our nation. Well, I don't have time to give you on a little travel trip, but if you go to the south entrance of Union Station in Washington, D.C., what will you find? 3 pieces of scripture. The desert shall bloom like a rose. All things under his feet. The truth will set you free. Listen, all flesh is like grass. The glory of man like the flower of the field. The grass withers, the flower falls, but the word of the Lord endures forever. And this is the word which by the gospel has been preached to you, and it is this gospel that we take out from here. Thank you for your patience.
And I loved, and he has an awesome accent.
Yes.
And he has.
But the best part of his sermon, his speech, whatever you want to call it, that day is the best part was he would quote from one of my favorite bands of all time, groups, duos, whatever you want to call it. He was quoting Simon and Garfunkel left and right, and I'm like, oh man, who is this guy? And I know that you kind of got on me because I didn't know who he was, and I didn't even know he had a radio show.
Like don't even listen. Come on, man. No, Alistair Begg. Everybody knows Truth for Life. Alistair Begg's been he's like a veteran about Christian broadcasting.
Your nose in a book and not in a radio.
But he is like a savant on Paul Simon lyrics. That's his point of pride. He absolutely loves it. And
he got to share some Simon and Garfunkel lyrics later on that evening, which was awesome. Mm-hmm. I could do that all day. I will say that we've discovered, so this is special and exclusive to the radio, we discovered what he wanted to say, a song he wanted to quote that he did not. Do you remember what that one was? No, I don't.
Ray Stevens, Mr. Businessman. He said he thought he'd get in trouble.
Ray Stevens song, which I'm also a Ray Stevens fan. So, I mean, I didn't, here's this guy that's up there speaking about things that, you know, obviously are relevant spiritually and why politics should matter to Christians. But, you know, he was also cool.
I think he's my kind of cool. I like Alistair Begg. You're all right by me. The fan club of 2 over here, and many, many more, I'm sure. Heard on radio stations just like this one. Tune in. Truth for Life, Alistair Begg. But on the political front, next up was Nikki Haley. I think it was pretty well received. Over there, I was going to say I had gotten to speak with her one-on-one, only in front of a few 100,000 TV viewers, but it was CNN, so it probably doesn't count. But we talked about pro-life at that time, and I was not particularly impressed with her answer, as you mentioned. You said Tucker gave her softballs. I just noticed the difference in him, and I don't know what caused that. He wasn't nearly as pointed, as direct. He was like he put aside his investigative reporter hat, and they kind of sat back together in their easy chairs.
Maybe he ate too much for lunch. I don't know.
Maybe he got a really good cheesecake.
Or maybe he's just being a gentleman, which I can respect. But
it should be fair. Right, correct. Just because she's a lady doesn't mean you can go easy on her. Well, since she's
running for president, he should have been throwing her curves and sinkers and knuckleballs like he was throwing everybody else. But you know, Nikki's another one that I got up and left to go do other things. But I went back and read the transcripts. No, seriously, I mean, as far as I'm concerned,
and we were all working at this event as well.
Yeah, well, yes, but I mean, as far as I'm concerned, I'm not going to give Asa or Nikki the time of day because as an evangelical Christian, I believe, you know, foreign policy is important. I believe getting out of debt is important. But as an evangelical Christian, the most important thing is defending marriage and defending life. Mm-hmm. And I know where Asa stands on this. And I know, well, actually, Asa's actually signed a few bills that were pro-life. So he has done some pro-life things. But his defense of the family with regards to this surgery.
Yeah, when you veto a ban on gender surgery on minors, then I don't know what else to say, but I can't call you my leader.
Right. Again, I'm not going to give you the time of day if you don't defend life, if you don't defend the family, and you know, that's just the way it is. So I went back and I looked at the transcripts of Nikki because I was actually wishing now that I had listened to that just in case he threw her a knuckle and asked her about abortion, but he didn't. Mm-hmm. So, and that's a problem.
And everybody else, and that is unfair because everybody else has to cover a lot of the same issues, and that presents, I know you don't want to be repetitive and you might have specific questions that would be directed, you know, towards specific candidates, obviously. But if you're going to ask everybody else in the room about it should be fair, is all I'm saying. If you're going to ask everyone else in the room about abortion, what you're going to do about that. And it was perfect timing because Kim Reynolds had just signed Iowa's bill.
Oh, it would have been perfect timing. I didn't think about that.
I would say that I think the question that was missing. So we'll do cons and pros today because I did think she shined in one moment that she did well. But I think what was conspicuous by its absence was something I want to know. I want Nikki Haley to answer. She had criticized Ron DeSantis for stepping up to Disney in an interview on Fox the day that he did that, the day that he took away the special privileges from Disney and kind of called him out on the carpet in a big way and attacked him where it hurts, which is their pocketbook. She said he was wrong for doing that in so many words. And she said, basically, in South Carolina, we know how to be friends with big business, and we're always welcome to have jobs
that sound like a Bush
in
thing?
South Carolina. And so she chastised him for doing that. Yep. And you know who asked her about that, actually, was CNN as part of that town hall. I don't know if you saw that. But I want to hear her answer on that. Are you seriously saying that Ron DeSantis standing up for the family by refusing to allow special government carve-outs for a corporation, that's a problem?
Anti-family?
That you would side with Disney over the average family in that fight?
Disney has made it very clear
I want an answer
they're
on
anti-family.
Yes.
They've made it very clear.
That they are openly defying the family and openly inculcating gender confusion in children. They are open about this.
This is the whole reason why Nikki can't win. And I hope and pray that she is not our candidate. I hope and pray that nobody makes her a VP or anything. Because, Edmund Burke said it the best. And I think you probably know the quote that I want to say.
I don't know, but I'll give you credit.
Some people disagree that he said it. But the quote that says, all it takes for evil to prevail is for good men to do nothing.
Contested Edmund Burke quote.
Correct. But the quote, though, is accurate. And I think that's what America is tired of. They're tired of politicians who talk big, but they're not willing to do anything. You know, who was the president that said his whole motto was walk softly and carry a big stick?
Teddy Roosevelt.
Exactly. That's what America wants. That's why they were all so pro-Trump, is because Trump had the biggest stick around, and he was not afraid to swing it and hit people with it. I mean, he was not going to back down.
Yeah, I don't think he walked softly, though.
No, he did not. He did not. And that was the part where he failed, and I think most of us evangelicals would say that he failed that, and that's the reason why we would vote for somebody else as president.
Major feet of clay.
Correct. But that's the problem.
So do we all.
But that's Nikki's problem. She has it the other way around. Mm-hmm. She's all talk, and even then, she's not the talk that we're wanting to hear.
Yeah.
She's compromise. I mean, the fact that she's willing to play nice to a gigantic corporation who's already making billions and who is trying to undermine the family speaks volumes.
Yeah, I think she should answer for that. I will say the part that I thought she shined the strongest was when they were talking about reform in agency reform.
In the agencies,
so, because a huge problem right now is that there's this systemic failure. The average American feels, in particular conservative Americans, feel like the FBI, the federal agencies are basically targeting us, that they consider us enemies of the state, and that they have been out to get, again, Donald Trump as a stand-in for every conservative American, that they targeted pro-life activists, that they consider parents, they treat parents like domestic terrorists, that they don't believe that we have our constitutional rights of free speech, that they're spying on us. I mean, that's almost a given at this point, that they are, censoring us from social media, that they're putting pressure on big tech so that we can't even have free speech in America anymore. We have the thought police literally breathing down our necks. And so I thought she did a good job of describing her record as governor in South Carolina and saying when I came in, and then in her job as a UN ambassador as well.
Machines, I think, are the majority of voting in America takes place on electronic voting machines. And I know that there are municipalities that haven't received access to the software that runs those machines. Why would that be, do you think?
I don't know. I mean, I'd be happy if everybody just did paper ballots and then we were done.
Yeah. Do you think that's, I think most people would agree with that. Do you think that's something that governors should push for?
I mean, I think that you need to show the people of your state that they can trust the system. I always put a lot of weight in that in South Carolina. I wanted to make sure that every South Carolinian knew that we had fair elections, that we had verified elections, and that we were making sure that there were no dead people voting and no people duplicate voting. And I think every governor should make sure that that doesn't happen in their states. And I think that you also go a step further. Congress should also have oversight of election integrity to make sure if we have to change things. A lot happened during COVID. Learn those lessons and say, how do we make sure it doesn't happen again? I think we've got some opportunities there.
It doesn't seem to be happening, though.
No, it doesn't. But what has Congress done for you lately?
Fair. Well, since you've been traveling all around the country, is this question, the question whether the elections are fair, whether your vote is counted, is this top of mind for Republican voters in your experience?
I think Republican voters want to have faith in their system. And I think there's still a lot of questions out there. I think they're still concerned that those things that happened during that election don't happen again. And that's why I think governors need to step up and make sure that they're doing the things. And some governors have done a great job. You have the best governor in the country, by the way. Kim Reynolds knocks it out of the park all the time. But I do think this is a responsibility that we should have. It's a democracy. And in a democracy, you want to make sure everybody has their vote. But more than that, the people need to trust the government that is doing those elections. And so we have to go and make sure that they have faith in that.
Thank you for saying that. One of the things that we've learned in the almost 3 years since the last election, various government agencies, intel agencies, law enforcement, FBI, CIA, NSA, were involved in shaping public opinion about the last election. They interfered with our election. And that suggests to a lot of people that maybe those agencies have too much unchecked power. You've worked in government. What do you think?
Well, yes, that's true. You know, when I was governor, I went and replaced the heads of every agency. It's the first thing I did when I came to office. It's the first thing a president should do is you control what you can control. And you start with your agency. So I replaced the heads of every agency. I made sure they were people, some didn't vote for me, but they were people who knew that sector. So I put people in every agency. I sent in teams into every agency to clean it up. Pull down regulations, down old issues, get rid of problem children. So in some cases, we had to tweak agencies. In other cases, we had to gut agencies. If you look at the American people don't trust our intelligence agencies. They don't trust our Department of Justice. So you can't just replace the person at the top. You've got to go through and really look at gutting those agencies and getting out a lot of that senior management and things that happen.
I think it's a really good point.
More than that, you have to understand that every action you take matters. So I'll give you an example. When I was at the United Nations, my very first week, someone got on the phone with the press and told them what I was going to do. None of it was what I was going to do. And so I called my staff and I said, who is this? And get rid of them. You're not going to believe who it was. John Kerry's sister. John Kerry's sister worked at the U.S. mission at the United Nations. And I said, get rid of her. And they said, you can't. She's here for 6 more months. And I said, you take her key pass, you take her computer, and we will pay her to sit at home. But she is not to walk back into this building.
Wow.
You have to be willing to really do the things to shake it up.
When I came in, I cleaned house. When I came in, I fired all the heads of everybody, all the middle managers that were doing a bad job. And so in that way, she looked like an effective executive. Right. And that was, I thought, her best moment.
I think so, too. In fact, I remember thinking that I hope other politicians who want America's vote, or at least Iowa's vote, are taking notes on this one. You know, later on, DeSantis touches on it a little bit, but he doesn't go as far as Nikki does. And I really liked that Nikki had a plan for taking care of the weaponization of these agencies. And let's be honest, it's not just weaponization, it's militarization of these agencies. I mean, when you can go in and full SWAT gear with 20 people and break down people's doors and arrest them in the middle of their family dinner, I mean, that's militarization. That's weaponization.
That's third world country tyranny.
Yes, exactly.
Or communist China.
I mean,
take your pick.
That's Hitler in the brown shirts.
That's a problem.
Exactly. That's a huge problem.
So we've got to make America better than that.
Correct. So I did like Nikki's response about that. Yeah. And she did get a lot of applause on that.
She did. Let's take a quick break now, because I think we're coming up on probably most people's favorite interview. If you lasted all day like we did, it was a long day, but it was a good day at the Family Leadership Summit right in the heart of Des Moines, Iowa. Rebekah Haynie, along with my better half, Matthew Haynie, and we were both front row, and we're giving you our breakdowns from our front row seat to the kickoff of the 2024 presidential races. And and we've got a couple of big ones. I think the biggest takeaways are yet to come, and we'll reveal our rankings for who we think did the best, did the good, the bad, and the ugly when we return. You're listening to FaithWorks Live. Hey, what's for dinner? If you're like me, I hear that 15 times a day. And fortunately, I have a plan. It's typically Animus beef at our house. We are such big fans of Animus beef at the Haynie home because it's just great quality beef. There's no steroids or antibiotics. It's naturally raised butcher beef. They sell by the quarter, the half, or the whole, and they support your local meat lockers so they can help you get it processed in a way that works for you. In this economy, it's good to have affordable options for your meat. And if you're willing to make a good investment in your nutrition for a healthy menu plan, I highly recommend Animus Beef. Contact Dave and Mary Lynn at animusbeef.com. They welcome your questions. They'll help get you on the schedule. They have locker dates coming up. Don't wait. Secure your locker date today. Go to animusbeef.com. That's OHNEMUS beef.com.